The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine is, in terms of student population, is postgraduate only. So we have postgraduate master's programs, which would normally include both face-to-face, and we also have distance learning programs. And then we also have a cohort of postgraduate research and doctoral students. Altogether, we have about 2,500 students, so quite small, relatively speaking. We're also a specialist institution with a focus on health, so global health, and core to London School of Hygiene Tropical Medicine's mission, LSHTM, is to improve health and health equity both in the UK and worldwide. So it's really important. Those kind of like characteristics of LSHTM are really important, both in terms of working in a global context and also equity being a kind of core to what we do. And these factors are really important in terms of our approach to tackling bullying and harassment. In terms of like the systems we had in place before we launched Report and Support for students to report issues, obviously there's the student complaints process that's been in existence for a period of time, and there would have been, various mechanisms around program evaluations and that kind of thing. But we received very few formal student complaints, and I think that was really kind of taken as a sign that there weren't issues, which is why I was kind of like mentioning the Equality and Human Rights Commission research, which kind of suggests, that disparity between what's actually happening and on the ground and what institutions think is happening. And I think that's what we were kind of experiencing. And I think the testimonies kind of like really shone a light and made us realize that we needed to do a lot more to encourage students to feedback where they weren't experiencing where they were experiencing things that were around maybe racial harassment or just concerns about content in the lectures or curriculum, that we would kind of enable that confidence to raise those issues. So we launched Report and Support at LSHTM in September last year, 2020. And prior to that, we had, for example, kind of collected staff-related bullying and harassment data via the Human Resources team. However, probably similar to many institutions, there's a real lack of data, particularly in terms of students. And I think as the Equality and Human Rights Commission research a couple of years ago suggested, there's a real gap in data and understanding of experience or what's happening on the ground. We did pick up on some kind of things around through staff and student surveys and feedback, which kind of indicated as well that there's really more to do in this area in improving our reporting mechanisms and raising awareness, and I think crucially around increasing staff and student confidence in bullying, reporting issues of bullying and harassment. So Report and Support, which we launched last September, has gone some way in terms of enabling reporting to happen and to make that process more transparent in terms of the reporting system. And since launching, the most prevalent kind of types of issues that have been reported over the last year have been around racial harassment for students. And I think the next most prevalent has been incidents of bullying, but that's more been of staff. We also, just to kind of note that we also received testimonials a bit before we launched Report and Support, in the months kind of before that, and that was kind of linked to the Black Lives Matter movement, and it really kind of triggered a sharing of testimonies alongside a petition to address racial inequity. And they're kind of quite a range of issues, but including experiences within lectures and within education. So it really kind of meant that we've had quite a radical shift in terms of understanding the issues over the past year, both through Report and Support, but also through those other mechanisms that I've mentioned. So it's meant that we've been able to kind of develop our responses, which can be better targeted through use of that data. In terms of our next steps, we're kind of like still very early on in that journey, and we've been able to learn quite a lot in that last year, and we're particularly keen still to kind of really focus on increasing confidence. As I mentioned earlier, that was kind of one of the areas. And like for staff, we mainly receive anonymous reports, and even when reports are kind of received, people aren't always confident in taking those forward. And then for students, there are still concerns about the extent that students are actually aware of Report and Support mechanisms, and even our wider reporting mechanisms as well, like around through our student representatives, through our student representative council, program evaluation, all of that kind of thing is improving the confidence in all of those systems. So I think we've been kind of using two main ways to prioritise our focus. One of them has been through the report and support and the insights reports that have come from that. So when we launched report and support in September 2020, we committed to undertaking that analysis and publishing as well the insights reports. And the second main way, I would say, has been through having a stakeholder group. So in terms of the insights report, it's shown that the data's kind of shown that there has been greater reporting in relation to racial harassment or racial inequities over, for example, sexual misconduct in relation to students' experience, and that has been able to guide our work. But we're very much kind of like conscious and aware that there'll be a range of experiences that students have had, and there might be experiences as well between students. And I think the online kind of environment over the last year has obviously impacted on what issues potentially might be, and that's been able to guide our work. And then secondly, I mentioned is the work that's been done via the Dignity and Respect working group. So that's a stakeholder group that we set up when we were preparing for and launching report and support. And the aim of that group was really at that point to act as a stakeholder group. And we established it to kind of help with the launch of report and support, but also it's the kind of policy review. So we've been reviewing our anti-bullying and harassment policy, and also to help in terms of developing our communications and training. So that group is made up of, it includes student representatives, including our student representative council, but also our programme representatives, student programme representatives. It also includes our anti-bullying and harassment advisors, or some of them. It includes representation from trade unions, and then from key services like human resources, our communications team, our training and development team, student support. And so kind of drawing on the data insights and drawing on kind of like feedback from those stakeholders has been able to feed into how we kind of develop our action plan going forward. And I think as well as the data and report and support, has also been learning from kind of investigations that have been undertaken in particular areas, and then recommendations that are coming out of that, and then really kind of like having those follow-up conversations about how we're going to take particular recommendations forward. So for example, around kind of communications, we've been discussing and reflecting on how to make report and support more accessible, and the working group has really been key in terms of reflecting on that, and just in terms of the language that we're using. Have an education related concern might not be exactly racial harassment, but it's making it clear that report and support might be an avenue that can be used to report things. And just, feeding back more, kind of reflecting more widely about how we progress all the different elements, because report and support is just one part of it. There's the communications, the training, developing resources, all of those kind of things. So I would say those would be the two main ways that we've been prioritising our focus for tackling bullying and harassment. So in terms of the governance structures we have in place at LSHTM, so we have our school EDI committee, which was reconstituted about 18 months ago, and that includes representation from our faculty EDI committees, our specific working groups, for example, Athena Swan, and it also includes representation from our staff and student networks and our student representative council. And then I mentioned previously we have the Dignity and Respect working group, but that's been very kind of like key on working on these areas around the policy and communications development. And then a further kind of really important aspect. So in response to the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, and a call for kind of more action around EDI, and specifically for kind of greater scrutiny within our governing body on EDI at the school. So there was a call for forming a specific diversity and inclusion committee as part of council. So we do now have a specific diversity and inclusion committee, which is a subcommittee of council. So that's part of our governing body, and they have a specific remit to scrutinise the EDI work kind of against our commitment. Another important bit of context actually is that we've recently developed our EDI strategy. That kind of provides the wider context in terms of setting out our approach to EDI and our aspirations. It kind of acts as our public kind of statement of commitment to progressing EDI. So now we've launched, we're kind of moving to implementation. And of course, like there's a lot of work that's been happening, as I've described, while we've been developing the strategy. But now we're kind of moving on to kind of implementation of the broader strategy. It enables us to regroup and rethink about that, like working group, for example, the Dignity and Respect working group, being a key strand of the EDI action plan. It's kind of given us a chance to reflect and review the terms of reference and our constitution to make sure that we've got representation. And that group will be able to focus on the dignity and respect and tackling bullying and harassment, as kind of previously mentioned, but so continuing in a way as before, but also kind of gives us extra impetus and support. One last point really regarding the wider work is that we've got a new director for the school. So Professor Liam Smith takes over as director for the school at the beginning of August, and he has put EDI at the top of his priorities, which is really positive. And he's personally takes an active interest in how we progress in this area. So in terms of engaging in the insights reports, inputting, kind of reflecting on how we can do things, how he can contribute. So I just say that's, although not part of the formal governance structure as such, but it's kind of really important to have his buy-in. So I say those would be the key kind of elements of our governance structure that we have in place at LSHTM. Yeah, so to make sure that our governing bodies get the information that they need. So as I mentioned, there's the kind of termly insights reports that come out of Report and Support. And we've been producing those termly to date. And those reports include kind of key bits of information. So the number of reports, the type of incidents, where they're kind of coming up, staff, student, which faculties, and key information kind of like in terms of the outcomes as well. So what have the outcomes been? I think those have been really called for actually from staff and students, as well as the key committees. And the other bit that we also include in those insight reports is kind of updates against the actions that we've committed to in terms of tackling bullying and harassment, and reviewing the actions. So there might be further things that we've added to our action plan as a result, for example, of particular investigations. So those insight reports go to our internal EDI committee and also go to senior leadership team, and they also go to the diversity and inclusion committee of council that I mentioned. So they would kind of like scrutinise those reports, and then we would have a discussion in the diversity and inclusion committee, and they would have the opportunity to ask questions and maybe ask for more information, that kind of thing. I just wanted to kind of note that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee have also commissioned a specific piece of work to focusing on race and racial harassment. So that provides further opportunity to kind of engage with students in particular, and enable students to feel empowered to share in terms of their experiences. Also, I mentioned that we've reviewed our policy recently, our anti-bullying and harassment policy, and that got approved in June. And we're now preparing some briefing sessions. So we've invited, key kind of members of staff internally, like our program directors and our talk program directors and heads of department. But we're also looking to invite members of council and specifically like the diversity and inclusion committee, so that they have a chance to attend those briefing sessions. Yeah, so that we can kind of give them that kind of background in terms of what we're doing and what we should be doing, and that kind of information. I would say through a number of ways. So I mentioned there's the EDI strategy and action plan, and we're kind of moving on to that implementation stage. And each kind of work stream or kind of key kind of overarching goal will have an executive sponsor linked to that. So in terms of our dignity and respect working group, say we will have an executive sponsor to help empower the work that we're trying to do through that group. I guess another factor is that thinking and reflecting on the recent Office for Students kind of expectations document and guidance. There's the point about kind of sharing information and data with governing bodies, and ensuring that they're briefed to understand the issues relating to their role, and enabling them to scrutinise what the information we're providing. So that would include, for example, briefing them on those Office for Student expectations themselves, and giving them that kind of wider understanding to enable them to do that scrutiny. Another key point to mention is that our Diversity and Inclusion Committee also has staff and student representatives. So they are directly accessible to staff and students as well, although they wouldn't be a kind of mechanism for reporting as such, but I guess that they're kind of like, it's a way to get feedback in terms of what we're doing. And that Diversity and Inclusion Committee also has external EDI experts from other organisations outside of the higher education sector actually. So kind of they bring broader kind of expertise and insights, and are able to advise. So I think kind of those kind of different mechanisms are really important in terms of kind of meeting and hopefully exceeding the Office for Student expectations in terms of making sure that governing bodies are empowered to drive action and pick up on where we're not maybe doing what we should be doing internally within the school.